Hey everyone, Sherry Wind here, just checking with you. So welcome to the beginning of week 7. I just want to give you a couple of updates, and then I particularly want to talk about this case study assignment sheet, which I'm sure some of you, or most of you, have seen this coming up in your weekly modules with a due date of July 10th. So that's coming up on next week. So I just wanted to review this with you next Friday exactly, just to make sure that you're on top of that, and if any of you had any questions. Before I do that, just hear me out for a moment. I just want to do a little bit of a recap from last week and anticipate a little bit what's coming up this week. So we finished talking about schizophrenia, and I really loved reading your reflections and your discussion this week. I thought it was very spirited and also is heading towards accomplishing one of our class's main missions, which is to understand mental illness more accurately, to be educated, to be informed of what actually disorders look like, whether it's anxiety disorders that we finished a couple of weeks ago, or mood disorders, bipolar disorder. I know you got a good sense of what bipolar disorder looks like in looking at it through the lens of a movie, Silver Linings Playbook, and again, schizophrenia. And I think Eleanor Longden's story really lets us, or has us appreciate the importance of understanding what it means to have schizophrenia. And I really was pleased with many of your changes of perspective on schizophrenia. And then looking forward to next week, we have personality disorders this week, and students are really interested in these as well. We're going to talk about disorders such as narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial, borderline, dependent, anxious. And the one thing I just want you to keep in mind as we talk about personality disorders is that think of what a normal personality disorder is. It's someone who has a set of traits, characteristics, just like you all have, that are somewhat flexible and shift and adapt to different situations. Individuals with personality disorders don't have that adaptability. It's very rigid. So a narcissist thinks of themselves no matter what. No matter if somebody's in need or somebody needs support or empathy, they just don't have the ability to do that. The expression I like to use is they show up at a funeral the same way they show up at a wedding, whereas of course you would have a different presentation. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed learning more about personality disorders this coming week 7. So lastly, I just want to briefly talk about the case studies. The case study is really, again, as this points out here, a chance for you to put your therapist hat on and really pull together many of the things we talked about more at the beginning of the semester when we talked about the assessment, diagnosis, and treatment plan for a client. So you're going to choose one of the many case studies that are listed here. So if you just scan down, there's 10 different case studies. And what you can do is certainly open each of these and get a sense of what the client is, how the client is presenting. They're not complicated. Believe me, when you look at them, as you're beginning to understand them, you can say, oh, that definitely looks like anxiety disorder. That definitely looks like bipolar. Oh, that sounds like a phobia. It's not hard. The hard part is to figure out how you're going to assess, diagnose, and treat a particular client. So the assignment sheet is here. Let me just open that up and show you some of the details of what the assignment sheet looks like. Again, everything is on D2L. So this assignment sheet here first talks about the purpose, is again to pull that together, become a detective, if you will, and look at, conceptualize what is really going on with this particular client. So you'll need an introduction. These are your 4 main parts. It's a 3-page essay. Who, what, where, why, when. What is this client experiencing? So recapping, summarizing what their presentation is. Number 2 is a list of symptoms and criteria. Be specific, because then you're going to have to, for step 3, is talk about how is this creating distress, dysfunction, go back to your 4 Ds. And lastly, give that person a DSM-5 diagnosis. I'm sorry, there is one more step. So you give them a DSM diagnosis. Please remember that most clients could be assessed with multiple different diagnoses. And again, remember, anxiety disorders cluster together. Somebody might have panic, generalized, and maybe even a phobia. So remember that in diagnosing particular clients. And I'm sorry, the 5th step that I didn't mention before is the treatment plan. So you're going to come up with, how am I going to treat this client? So remember, in the assessment phase, there's multiple ways. You might want to do an interview. You might want to run them through a depression inventory or some kind of projective testing. And then you say, okay, this client's symptoms match this particular diagnosis or diagnoses. And then how is that treatment plan going to look? So the treatment plan might be influenced somewhat by your perspective. So maybe you're going to take more of a behavioral perspective if you're working with a client with a phobia. And then you might say, well, I'm going to do some maybe cognitive behavioral, maybe I'll do some exposure response prevention therapy, or maybe I'll do systematic desensitization, and maybe I'll even do family therapy and couples therapy. So again, each of the assessment, diagnosis, and treatment is multifaceted. Lastly, here's your rubric, basically how the paper will be graded. So it's a really fun paper. Again, the cases themselves are not complicated. They're usually maybe 200, maybe 250 words long. And again, it's not hard to be a good detective for this assignment. So I hope you have fun with it. And again, it's really starting to pull together the whole process of actually seeing what a client presents with, assessing them, what's going on, diagnosing them with a disorder or disorders, and then coming up with a creative treatment plan. Please let me know if anybody has any questions. It's great chatting with you, and I'll talk to you all soon.